Hi everyone, welcome back to Race to the Top. In today's episode, we'll be talking to Damian Thompson about things like first going into the snow in Germany, walking 20 miles to school, and listening to Bruce Hornsby. At the end of this conversation, I felt really enlightened, and I hope you will do too. Let's get into it. Welcome, Damian.
Thank you very much, Oki.
I mean, there's so much to sort of cover in there. But quickly, tell me, what does the commercial director of landlord do?
So we supply mortgages for landlords who provide about 4 million homes within the UK for people to rent. So about 18% of the population
Right. Oh, wow.
live in rented properties. So
So these are
TMW,
like commercial mortgages for people. Is it just buy to let?
buy to let,
Okay.
mainly buy to let.
All right. Because as part of the market, I suppose most people wouldn't know a lot about.
No, it's not. It's well known within the industry, but effectively we support that really important piece about people who can't afford to buy a home, allowing landlords to rent to them, and it's a really important part of the housing sector.
So there's a sort of chain, without that, lots of things don't exist.
Without that, a lot of things don't exist.
Yeah.
So it's really important to the UK economy, and it's a job I love because to get to where I've got to in life, I've had to rent.
Yes.
Yeah, I've had to move and move quickly, and therefore the ability to find some place to live has been really important within that. And that's mostly in its initial stage to take the opportunity meant that I had to rent before I could buy.
Okay. So amazing to have you here on the podcast today. And actually, your background is actually quite unusual for people we've had on the podcast so far. As I said, you were born here in Epsom,
Yeah,
but went back to Barbados at what age?
4.
4 years old.
Yeah.
And so then spent 15
years, yeah.
in Barbados. What took you back, or it wasn't you were 4. So how did you end up going back to Barbados?
It's really interesting proposition. So I got to speak to my dad about it before he passed, and I kind of tapped into like, why did you make that decision for us?
Although it's very quick, isn't it amazing how much of your life, because I had the same, you go through and just accept it, and one day you decide to ask a
question.
a very simple,
A very simple
question.
A very simple question, but I guess my dad and mum came to England after the kind of Windrush generation. So they were almost the second wave of that immigration. And they came, my mum, because the National Health Services were looking for nurses. And my dad came directly to the army. So my dad left Barbados,
right?
flew to England, didn't even get off the plane in England, flew straight to Germany and into 12 foot of snow as a soldier.
Right. Had you ever seen snow before?
Never seen snow before, never been in snow before, but that's where he ended up. So my parents came, and I think one of the things that was really interesting with them coming as that second wave is I think they got to see some of the challenges as well as the opportunities that existed.
Okay.
And the one thing my dad always talked to me about was the value of education and how when he looked at his brothers and sisters here, he didn't think the kids were doing as well educationally as they could. So both of them made a decision that they were going to take us back to Barbados to be educated.
Right.
But in making that decision, what they decided was to leave us in Barbados for 12 months with our grandparents on our own.
All right.
So I thought I was going on holiday.
Right.
And then I ended up in this place where I was living in a house with mosquitoes for the first time and, really hot. And it was just a totally different experience. But to a certain degree, we felt abandoned, me and my brother did. It was like no one explained to us. I think they did, but one day they were there. One day they were there and then one day they were gone. So I was kind of dropped into Barbados as a melting pot and kind of took it from there.
And like, there's a lot to unpack there, but like, how did that feel? Because, there's one thing being in another country that, although is where you're, ancestrally from, isn't the country you're used to. And the second thing is not being there with your parents.
Yeah, so it's the first time I met my grandparents and my grandmother and my grandfather. We stayed with them. They brought us up. We went to school there. And on reflection, myself and my brother, when we first started, when we were 8 or 9, we talked about it. We felt abandoned.
Yeah.
But in reality, I think it was the making of me.
Yeah.
Because I just went to this totally new experience, right? Where I had to assimilate. So imagine I'm going to school with a very strong English accent, with a group of kids where my accent is alien, right? Everybody can play cricket and football, and I'm kind of like new to it. And even the local calypso dance, and I had absolutely no rhythm. So I found that actually I went back and I learned to assimilate. I learned to fit in because we were so different. But also in that, my grandfather was hugely entrepreneurial. So I was able to see him up front operate in a very entrepreneurial way, in ways that even to today, I still take some of the things that he taught me then and use them in my work with my children today. He was just very, very different. And I mean, an example of that was there were about 8 or 9 grandkids. He had a small farm. He used to grow sugarcane. But every one of us had to work. Each one of us had to do an activity, and he paid us at the end of the week. So it wasn't, it wasn't like you're going to go and do this for nothing.
Pay your money or pay you sugar cane.
I'm going to pay you money for your effort. All right?
Yeah.
So age and effort. And I think that always stayed with me. And then he would say, really interesting, you can give me back some of your wages to invest, or you can keep it. Right? So if you give me back 25 cents at the end of the month, I might give you $1.
All right.
I might give you back the 25 cents, or I may have lost it all.
So what did you decide to do, first of all?
I think at first I went to sweet shop. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Instant gratification, right?
Instant gratification. And then over time, I kind of went to a page where I kind of thought to myself, maybe I don't go to the sweet shop every week, but I give him back that 25 cents. And then over time, he would do things like he would give me $5, or he'd say to me, he'd put $5 in my bank account. So through all of the grandchildren, he really started to teach us that real focus on entrepreneurship, delayed gratification, long-term planning. He was, I mean, today, I kind of think of him and I think if he'd had the opportunities that were available to people today, he'd mostly be a young billionaire. Yeah.
I think we all think that about my dad's an entrepreneur as well. From the 60s and 70s, and he's so smart and brilliant, but without the access to capital that is available now, and the opportunity, and even the concept of entrepreneurialism, although it's always existed, people have had shops and businesses, but it's like being an entrepreneur is a thing.
It's a thing.
Whereas back then it really wasn't a thing. And there wasn't that much value in ideas. Whereas now people run with ideas.
And I think he was always kind of, one of the things he always drummed into me was, and I only realized it was a kind of Frederick Douglass quote recently, is he kind of said, look, it's not about the height you climb, it's the depth you've come from. And I absolutely agree with that. So, he was all about, this isn't about me, this is about where I help you to get to as a grandchild of mine, and where do you help your children to get to? Because it's a tough journey.
Yeah. I mean, 100%. It's kind of like the same thing. That's kind of even more beautiful. But it's about distance travelled. I always think success is not about the destination, but the distance travelled. So if you're coming from a socially deprived background and you make it to be a middle manager in commerce, your distance travelled is huge, like enormous. Whereas if you come from a public school education as anybody into CEO jobs, often that seems like a greater achievement, but the distance travelled is not as far, right? This depth that you come from, the depth is is absolutely.
And I think it's really important as we reflect with this younger generation to kind of go. It's really important that you build on the foundations, and they might still feel a bit shaky, but compared to where they were 40, 50, 100 years ago, progress is unbelievable.
No, I think you're absolutely right. One of the really super interesting things about what you just said is about being black and going back to Barbados, but feeling different.
Yes.
That's really sort of fascinating. So you come from a country where you're in the minority in terms of race, and you go to a country where you're the majority in terms of race, but you feel different.
Yeah.
How was that? And how long did it take you to? Because that's a very unusual thing.
Yeah, it is, because I think there were a couple of really interesting interplays to that, right? So because my mum was so focused on her education, I was always a very good reader.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went to primary school, to control the kids, the teacher would say to me, Damian, can you read in the afternoon? Because everybody was just loved the English accent and they were there for that, and it was okay. But it also meant you stood out. And I didn't really understand every word that was being said around me because the lingo was kind of very tight. And my mum was like, you are going to speak the Queen's English until you die, right?
Yes.
So you had that kind of balance about the society in which I had to prevail. Mm-hmm. And even though I was black, I was different. To the point that when I got to secondary school and I told most of my friends that I was born in England, they just used to laugh because they were like, there's no way you sound more Barbadian than us. But it's because I had an assimilation. And I think that really helped me, because I think growing up in a black society, you get a lot of benefits, but you also get to see that the world's not really any different regardless of where you are.
Right.
There are the haves, there's the have-nots. Yeah. There are different challenges based on where you are. So I think that assimilation came rather quickly. I would say I was 4. By the time I was 8 or 9, I was more Barbadian than the guy that was born at the hospital down the road.
I think it's really interesting what you said about the haves and have-nots. We spend so much time thinking about, a race and colour, but your point is there's as much difference between the people who have and have not, even where everybody is the same colour. There's still prejudice, there's still segmentation, there's still those sort of issues.
And the interesting thing is, it's because, if I kind of step back from it, Barbados was an English colony. Therefore, everything that was in England really was in Barbados.
Yeah.
It just, and we'd maybe had independence in 1966.
Right.
I was in Barbados in 1976.
Yeah.
So you think really 10 years on from that, what's really changed? It's a young island finding its way.
Yeah.
It's about, was it taken? Was it trying to grow? But those things stay for generations.
Yeah. So what was it like growing up in Barbados?
Amazing. It was.
Everyone listens to the podcast going, "That's a stupid question, Oki," because that must be amazing.
But it's really interesting, that question, Oki, because I think when people think of it, Barbados to the English evokes an emotion.
Yes.
It evokes slower pace of life.
Yeah.
The people are so friendly. Yeah. Everything is so slow. The beaches are beautiful. Yeah. I just go there and relax.
Everyone's like, take me there now.
Take me there now. It's in the English mind, it's kind of like paradise.
It is. Well, it is paradise.
It is paradise. But living there, you get a different perspective, right? So living in Barbados for me was highly educational. It shaped me as an individual by the variety of things that I was able to see and the experiences I had. So I lived on the east coast of the island, a place called St. Philip, which is quite close to Sam Lars Castle, a very famous resort. But okay, I used to leave home, and I was maybe 200 yards from a very steep cliff.
Right.
300 foot down to the ocean.
All right, wow.
Atlantic, really rough. But I would stay there and go to myself, if all I see in life is this island, then I haven't really done enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it was great. It was really warm. I learned a lot, but it was also enclosed.
Yeah.
It was also
small,
it was
really.
small,
It's a
right?
small
It's
island.
106 square miles.
Yeah.
It's small. And I found that there's some people that were just happy, I'm going to spend the rest of my life on this island.
Yeah.
But I was never that person.
Wow.
I was kind of, what I learned here, the lessons I get from my grandfather and my parents, I really want to test on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
And, I kind of was in this space of, and I think it was something that's been deep in me for a long time. Could I go back with what I've learned here and really live, really make a difference wherever I go in the world?
So that was your decision at 19
Yeah.
to come back to the UK.
Yeah.
I mean, how was the UK seen from Barbados? And what were your expectations on returning?
If I talk, so Barbados is, if we could keep Barbados, and I'll get to why I left at 19. But, when I was 11 years old, ticking the 11 plus, I remember my dad having a conversation with my brother, the night before the 11 plus exam. And he said to my brother, I don't want to tell Damian this, but your mother's got a brain tumor. And if she stays on the island, she won't live. So tomorrow, she's going to America for an operation. And my brother's just bawling. My dad thinks I'm asleep, but I'm up.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't understand what's a brain tumor? I didn't really understand what it was. So I did my common entrance exam. And the teacher said to my dad, is everything okay with Damien? Because he spent most of the thing just writing mummy on the application, on the form. He did the work, but he's just kind of doodling. And my mum went to America for 18 months. I didn't see her. I didn't know what was happening with her, no communication. And when she came back, the left side of her body didn't work because she'd had a brain tumor on the right side of her body. And therefore, my life growing up was a pretty tough one because whilst most of my friends were out playing and doing what I need to do, I need to go to secondary school. I'd get on a bus at 3:00. I'd come home. The lady would look after my mum would go. I'd look after my mum. I'd take care of the animals because my dad always kept animals to be entrepreneurial, and we had chickens and stuff. But I spent a long time with a very ill parent. And my mum was in this space of, look, she had lined us up from very long. Like, Damien, I'm not sure I'm going to be here forever, but I want you to be an independent man. So I'm going to teach you to iron your shirts, to cook, to clean, to wash, to be able to look after yourself. And we're going to have conversations about what some of the challenges in the world could be for you. So when my mum passed at 16, I think I was in this kind of like, school meant nothing to me.
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting position. I then did my A-levels, and in the last year of my A-levels, I was still in a fog. Maybe 6 months before taking my A-levels, I was in a fog. And we had a geography tour to Guyana. We went to Guyana, and, it was like going back in time 200 years, okay?
Really?
It was, Guyana was just very, very, very basic. We went to the falls, stuff, and it was just wonderful. And I met a guy there who changed my life. And I've never been able to find him, but maybe if he hears this, maybe if we can get this played in Ghana,
well,
he'll hear it, and I'll try to make sure I send it to my friends.
And we can get invited to Ghana.
Can you imagine me, you going to Ghana, and this would be beautiful.
I'm with you on that, bud.
But his name was Martin, and I was still feeling sorry for myself, how woe betide me, life's all this kind of stuff. And I met Martin, and Martin used to walk 20 miles to school every day and back home.
20 miles?
20 miles.
How long did that take?
It took him, he left home at 6 o'clock in the morning to get school for 9 o'clock.
Wow.
And he'd walk. And he was the only person in his family who had an education. And I had a pair of old Puma shoes that the toes were busted out of. You know, he kicked them so much. And he said to me one day, he said to me, Damian, can I have those shoes? I said, Martin, look, to be honest, I'll give you my good shoes, not these ones. He said, no, Damian, you keep the good shoes. I'll take these. And he took them, and he came back 2 days later. We were on a camp, and the shoes were perfect. He'd cleaned them. He'd sewn them up. He'd whitewashed them. They were like brand new. And that day I said to myself, whoa, Damian, what are you doing? There's this guy who's walking 20 miles to school, who's taking a pair of your old shoes and is seeing real value in them, who's maybe never going to get the experiences that you're going to get. And you need to do something with your life. And I went back to school and I was ultra focused for 6 months. And it was at that point I decided, yeah, I'm going to go back to England. And I just decided at that point, just everything fell into place. I was kind of like, right, I'm going to go and test myself on this big stage. And to today, people at work will say to me, why are you generally quite happy? And I'll say, because around the world, there's somebody today who's a Martin.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky.
And but the thing about Martin is that, one, he's not. Was he unhappy? I suppose
No.
He was happy, right? So people go, "Oh, poor Martin." No. Martin's happy, right? Martin's walking school. Martin's working hard. It's not he's not woe is me. He's on it.
He's
to
on
make
it.
the best of his life, right?
Because he's in the space of like,
yeah,
I've been dealt these cards,
Yep.
and I'm going to deal with them.
yeah. I'm going to play the cards.
I'm going
I've
to
been
play the
dealt.
cards that are right with me. And, throughout my life, I had loads of different experiences like that. So because, I've always been someone who's fought to get to where I've got to. When I did my O-levels, I never forget this. When I did my O-levels at school, I got 6 Bs. And
Nice and uniform.
Nice uniform. Not too bad. A couple of C's and a couple of Bs. And when I got to go back into sixth form, I didn't get into sixth form, right? Mm-hmm. And I called up one of my friends and I was saying, oh yeah, I'm going to have to go to the college to do it because I didn't get back in sixth form. I went to Harson's College, which is one of the premier schools in Barbados, founded in sorts of like Eton type level.
Okay.
Then again, so I rang him and I said, boy, I didn't get into school. He said to me, Damian, I'm in and I've got 4 Bs and 2 Cs. I was like, what do you mean you're back in? He said, yeah, I'm in sixth form. And, I went to that school for 7 weeks. I met the headmaster every week and said to him, you got 3 people in this school who've got poor grades to me, but the parents are richer than mine.
Right.
And I'm not in, even though I've got better grades than them. And he kept saying to me, come back next week, I'll look into it. And every week at 9 o'clock in the morning, I was at his window. And my dad was saying to me, like, Damian, you're 6 weeks into school. Why don't you just go and join the college? I was like, Dad, no, I'm not giving up on this. This just isn't fair, right? So then at the end of the 7th or 8th week, he said to me, look, I'm going to let you in. I've spoken to the teachers. I'm going to let you in. But just be clear, those guys that are in are unlikely to make it at the end of this first year of sixth form. I said, and that's beautiful. I just want the same chance as them.
Yeah.
And at the end of that first year of sixth form, all 3 of them left and I stayed.
Wow.
Because for me, it was this bit, it was like my grandfather funneling me around. This isn't fair, right? It just isn't fair. So what am I going to do? Am I going to just give in? Or am I going to say, give me the same opportunities as everybody else? Right? And that is me in a nutshell.
I mean, what an amazing story, but also touches on something that I know you and I have spoken about, which is this whole idea of grit and determination. The things that have characterised the people who've successfully broken through glass ceilings, is this exact thing. Well, two things you touched on. One is this determination, and the second is this sense of fairness. That's just not fair, right? And so I want to be treated fairly. And I think fairness is at the heart of the struggle that we're there to talk about, which is no one wants extra, they just want fairness, right?
And it's fairness, but it's also a reality, right? So, I kind of look at my grandfather with those 9 grandchildren, right? All of them had limited amounts of ability. Some of them didn't really care about it, but everybody got a chance to build the greater good. And I kind of think of it today and I go, why wouldn't we want everyone in society to have the opportunity to play a part to drive this country economically? I mean, why would you do anything to keep anybody out who can help growth? We all need it. So it was that fairness, but it was also, if you unlock those capabilities, you might get really surprised.
Yeah.
You might find the next Elon Musk.
Yeah.
You might find, the next Steve Jobs. And they may be in places that you don't expect them to be.
There will be in places.
There will be.
There will be.
So for me, unlocking that's always been a part of what I think about.
Amazing. You sound like you had very wise grandparents and some mother and father. We almost with every guest I've talked about, what did your parents or grandparents tell you about the struggles that were ahead of you? So how do they frame it? So my parents told me I had to work harder. That maybe they said twice, I don't know. I've kind of forgotten, but they were very clear. For you to do well, you have to do better. You have to be better, right? And they drummed it into me. And part of what when we first talked about this years ago, I sort of said, that was part of what motivated me was fun. I found that I was telling that to my own children. And I thought, wow, 30 years later, I'm saying the same thing to my kids as that I was told. Is that right? Should I be doing that? And so, I'm always really interested, like, what did your older guidance, grandparents and parents, tell you about the struggle that you're about to go through? And what do you tell your kids? It's
really interesting because I was thinking about that the other day, and because I've now having twin boys, it's kind of really in the wheelhouse for me, right?
How old are
they? They're going to be 10 at the end of this month. Okay. So, growing fast and causing problems.
Oh, yeah. More to come, my
friend. More, I could imagine, brother. I could imagine. So it's really interesting because my dad never told me I had to work harder than anybody else. Right. My dad said a couple of things to me, which I found really interesting. And I think it came from his time in the army, which was not every black man's your friend and not every white man's your enemy.
No, interesting. Which is true.
Which is true, right? So, and in that judgment, he said to me, you need to be able to learn and to be able to question, to spot the really genuine people in this world. Mm-hmm. So he was all about your powers of observation, your ability to listen, your assimilation and knowledge. And then the second thing he said to me was, I have views in life, but they're not all shaped by facts. Mm-hmm. So I remember in my consciousness, kind of Malcolm X and that whole movie was spreading on. I said to my dad, what do you think of Malcolm X? And he said to me, Damian, I don't have a particularly good view because I was assuaged by what we saw and the difference that he wanted. He said, but here's a book. You read it, then let's have a debate about what do you think Malcolm X was and what do I think Malcolm X was? And maybe you'll educate me and maybe I'll educate you.
Yeah.
So in everything that was kind of get to the facts, read, explore, get different perspectives was my dad all of the time.
Right, that's good.
It wasn't kind of, you got to work hard. It was just like, look, that's just the way the world is, but I want you to always be able to not assume. His strongest point was not to assume.
Yeah.
Because in that assumption, people will always assume things about you, but make sure you don't always assume things about others.
Yeah.
So that was him. My mother was much more focused on, and it's almost from the beginning was, Damian, you have to be able to do things for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Independence.
Have the ability to be independent. Have the ability to fly on your own and to be able to do that. And be able to delay gratification. Mm-hmm. So her point for me was always, what is the end goal you are looking for? And what are you willing to give up to get to that? She said, because you will have to give up things to get to where you really want to go. So I think those were the kind of lessons. My grandfather was just look out for signs. He was entrepreneurial, but brilliant in the best of ways. So, he would do things, and it wasn't what he said, but it's what he did. So he would say to us things like, I'm going to park my bicycle here, and nobody's to ride it at all. You can't leave temptation in the hands of kids. So we would take the bike up and we'd go and ride it, and we would mark on the wall exactly where we'd put it. Because over time he caught us, and every time he caught us, he flogged us. Right. So it wasn't a painless experience.
No.
But he would. The fun was trying to trick him to the point where he knew.
Yeah.
And then one day we all realized what he did. He just spanned the wheel and put the bolt in at a specific place on the wall.
Right.
And once he knew where that was, he knew if he'd ridden it or not. And over time, we just got to it, right? And then he would be like, you found that one, so you can ride the bike. So it was, you can get to the bike, but you've got to learn a lesson before you get to the bike.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, it was like the world's open to you, but it was almost like you've got to go through some doors.
Yeah.
Yeah. In this world, it's going to be right in front of you. The temptations are going to be there, but are you on the prize? What are you learning? So I think my grandparents and my parents are really practical.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was never you can't get there.
Yeah.
It was just, it's going to be difficult. How are you going to do it?
And work it out.
Work it out.
Work it out.
Work it out.
That's so clear. I could go there, but we're going to move on because you've got so many interesting things. So you come back to the UK at 19 years old, having been different, assimilated yourself, become the same, and then you take yourself out of one thing and you plonk yourself into a completely new, not new to you, but completely different environment where your racial identity is completely different again. How was that? That was
really tough, right? So I came here in December 1990. It was in kind of like heart of a recession.
Yeah, that's right.
I came back to Birmingham. My uncle Gordon, and this is one of the interesting things, when my mum was ill, she wrote a letter. She knew she was going to die, and she wrote a letter to my uncle saying, if my brother ever wanted to come back to England, he should put him up. Mm. But it was me who wrote to him and said to him, I'd like to come. And he was like, your mum has already asked me if you can do this. So she'd kind of planned ahead. So I came back. And I came back and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do for a degree. So but I knew that my dad had been too much financial strain with my mum's illness and the operation and looking after two kids. I knew that he would go and borrow money to put both of us through university. I was like, Dad, I just can't do that.
Yeah.
I don't know what I want to do. You're going to borrow money to put me through university, which I don't need to do. And I decided then that I'm going to go back to England. So when I landed here, I kind of wanted to go to university, but you had to spend 3 years in the country before you could get a grant. And actually, it felt fair to me. I was like, it's like you come back, you put something back into the country before you can get an opportunity to go to studies. So then I decided that I needed to work. Mm-hmm. And I'd apply for jobs, and it was really interesting. I'd apply for jobs, and Damian Thompson doesn't really tell you that I'm a black brother.
No,
Damian Thompson could be anybody.
And is.
So I'd apply for jobs with my O levels and A levels, and I would get, oh, come on in for an interview. And I went to a couple of places, and when I turned up, they would go, oh no, the vacancy's filled.
They would actually
Say that to me. Yeah. The vacancy's filled. Sorry, we've got a bit of an issue. The vacancy's filled. So then after a while, I would start calling ahead and saying, can I just double check that this vacancy is still open? And they say, yes, the vacancy is open. When I get there, they'd kind of go, no, sorry, we've just filled it this morning, kind of stuff. I didn't even get an interview, even though I got past the circumstances.
In the 90s?
In the 90s. And then at this one point, I went to an interview, and the guy was just about to trot out, sorry, we filled the job. I said to him, look, I know I know most that you filled the job, or I'm not going to get it. But the one thing I really want is practice. Mm-hmm. So I know you've booked an hour out for this. I know I'm not going to get a job, but could you just run me through the questions? Just give me a chance to answer the questions. And he said to me, look, yeah, so we went through the interview, we answered questions, we got on really well. And he said to me at the end, he said, you know, I'd really like to offer you a job, not this job, but I'd like to really, that's taken, but I'd really like to offer you a job over here. And, you know, it's in that space where I said, look, I really appreciate that. But if the answer I got at the beginning was no because of who I was, it's not going to be any better within this business. So, you know something? Thank you very much. Even though I'm desperate for a job, I'll decline. And I remember that time when you were on the dole, you had to show that you were looking for work.
Yeah.
And I had my 6 months interview, and I took a black bag in with all my letters, declined letters, and the guy looked at me and said, sorry, what's that black bag for? So you wanted me to bring proof that I have applied for jobs, and these are all jobs I've applied for, this is what I've done. And he said to me, nobody ever comes in here with a bag like that. It's usually like, you know, he said, you don't need to come back for 12 months. I'm okay. I'm going to send you off for 12 months because clearly I can see that you don't want to be on the dole. And the opportunity at the Halifax came up, was really interesting. It was a job, we had to apply for it. And I applied. I got a call saying, we'd like you to come for an interview, do tests. I did the test.
Did you check that the job was still open?
I checked. It was good. I applied. And then I went for the interview. And the second stage of the interview, the lady had a number of cue cards, right? So it was really good. You had your mathematical test, but they wanted to see how you thought. And she had these cue cards, and it was like a room of 10 or 12, maybe, little individual offices where they held the interviews at the regional office. And there were 10 or 12 of us that went for the interviews, and we all went in, and the lady started asking me the cue card. She said, well, just ask you a couple of these, right? And I'm in the interview, and I'm answering, and all of a sudden I can see one person goes out, two people go. So like the most that were being asked were 5 or 6 questions. The whole room leaves. The people that were speaking to them also left. And this lady kept me there, and she asked me every single cue card. So my mind talk at the end, right, when I left there was like, well, I answered them all. And I answered them in the way that my grandfather had made me think about the situation. So it wasn't, you know, what would you do in these circumstances? I felt I answered in the way that, not textbook, but the way that I actually thought. And I went home and I said to my aunt, I said, oh, that's another interview that I've flunked. And she's crying with laughter. I'm like, what do you mean? Auntie, I've just come and told you that I've flunked an interview. She said, Damian, they've called. They want you to come in on Monday. Right? I'd got the job.
Wow.
But okay, in my mind, I'm kind of like, why is this woman asking me all these questions? I met her maybe 18 months later at another regional stuff. And I said to her, I've just got to ask, why did you ask me every single cue card? She said to me, I've been doing this for 20 years. And I have never heard the answers that you've given me to those kinds of questions. No one's ever given me that context or that way of thinking about that problem. And she said to me, the reason I asked you them all was I just want to see what you were. But after the first 3, you'd got the job. No, that was another really important lesson to me.
Yeah.
Which was, I'd assumed, back to what my grandfather told me not to do, my dad told me, I'd assumed that the reason she'd ask me all the questions was because she wanted to fail me. But that wasn't the context. That wasn't what was in her mind. That wasn't what I saw, right? It was just, she's really interested in a different perspective. And I knew then that was a company for me. I just thought myself, right. I think Halifax Building Society is the place that I think I stand at least a chance.
Yeah. And it's always interesting in those scenarios, isn't it? Because when you don't know the game, we'll talk about the game later, but when you don't know the game, you're thinking a long interview is a bad thing, but actually a long interview is a good thing. Right, a short interview is a bad thing. And it takes you a while to learn that, right? If you're in and out in 10 or 15 minutes, the chances are you're not getting the job, right? If they're still chatting to you and wanting to know a bit more about you, the chances are you've got a good shot, So again, for young people to know, I mean, amazing. So you were already encountering, what was effectively institutional racism, and we've talked about this before, which is, you went speaking to Barbados speaking Queen's English. You came back from Barbados speaking Bajan, because you were assimilating, right? Do you think that had anything to do with it? I mean, the Damian Thompson and you being black, that's an issue, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got a heavy accent as well. What do you think the role of accent is in this sort of environment?
I think it's a really interesting perspective. So the reason I didn't change my accent on the way back was because I'd seen a number of my friends come up from Barbados and they'd been here 3 months and it sounded like the Queen. And I was like, that doesn't really make sense, number one. But number two, my first job was in a bank branch in King's Heath in Birmingham. And one of the things that I realized was my accent, people clocked if they'd been to Barbados before and they kind of went, you're Barbadian. And it was, after a while, it kind of opened up a door in terms of conversation. Now, when you're in a bank branch and you are, back as those days were, creating leads to get notice on your performance, any angle that I had that was going to make me different and open up opportunities for conversations I was going to take. That was number one. Number two, though, that bank was used by people of color, be it Asian, black, Greek, so accents were different. And therefore, one of the things that I kind of meant to myself was, actually working here, I'll help my colleagues to serve those customers better. And when those customers come in and they hear me, then that's okay. Because over time, they need banking services too. So I'm just going to be me. And being me at that point was, I was baked, right? I was very confident in who I was. My accent was a conversation starter, but it was also the place that I could go to if I felt the racism or anything else. It's kind of like, I'm locked into me. I'm okay. I'm comfortable.
So basically, you decided that being your authentic self at work was the most powerful way.
The most powerful way. The most powerful way.
So then how do you feel about code switching then? Because so lots of people of colour, whether they be African, Caribbean, Indian, actually feel like to get on, they have to code switch. They have to become a different person, a more full, watered down, filtered version of themselves. What's your view on that?
It's situations are different, right? So the context I have, which is very different to a lot of kids that grew up here, was I had that society. I grew up for 15 years in that context of the Prime Minister looks like me, the Governor General looks like me, the High Court judge looks like me, the policeman looks like me. So I'm baked, right? There are people around me in positions that I can see that speak like me and act like me and are like me. So I'm formed, right? If you are here and your life has been the challenges that you've had to go to school, and that's one of the ways you've had to assimilate. It's really difficult to kind of say, where's your authentic self? Because your authentic self is a part of growing up in this culture and being here and going to watch football and watching telly. Remember, my telly, my music is totally different.
Yeah.
I'm listening to the Mighty Gabby and Serenader and Red Plastic Bag and John King. I'm listening to people talking about the challenges in our society and the way we've come. Growing up here, you don't have that.
No.
So,
or you only have a part.
You only have
of
a
it.
part of it, and a very small part of it. Whereas I kind of came along as that's part of me. So by the time I get here, I'm confident in my skin.
Yeah.
I know who I am. The lessons are deep baked in, and I realize though that if I go to a board meeting, I'm not going to speak like I speak to my buddies in Barbados on the beach, because they're just definitely want to understand me. But a part of who I am, a part of what I am, the way I lead is authentic. So I have to be myself.
Yeah.
And that worked for me. And for some other people, it doesn't. But also too as well, the reality is, lots of people of color here never got the opportunity to go and get baked in their own communities.
100%.
The parents didn't take them back or send them back for a year to go to school and say, right, go to school there for a year, then come back here. It wasn't a done thing. It wasn't thought about. We had to kind of create the struggle here. So for kids here, it's very different. I find now, even if I go into, there's a difference between me and most black professionals that you will speak to because they don't sound like me.
No, they don't. But what's amazing about you in the years I've known you is your voice is authentic, and I don't mean accent. Your voice, who you are, your sense of being, your personality is very much you. And I think people can be that. So actually, when you strip out accent, those people who are successful know their own voice, right? They know their sense of self, and you're exactly the same. You just sound slightly different.
Just sound different.
And that's amazing. So going on to career, then, you obviously have worked your way up at Halifax. Well, basically, your distance travelled is large, right? What were the most significant steps in your career, and how did they happen?
It's really interesting. I've been reflecting on that recently because I've been thinking about kind of like where I've got to, and people always say to me, what's been your journey? And I think I realized a couple of things really early, which was there were some people that came into the bank, spent 3 months on the counter, and then within 12 months, they were a management trainee up in the organization. So they came in and went vertical. Mm-hmm. And I some of them did well, but not all of them did well. Mm-hmm. So I decided very early in my career that there were two things I was going to have to do. I was going to have to go a lateral. I was going to have to move around.
Yep.
And if I wanted to be senior, really senior, and be able to stand out, I needed to do all of the jobs around me so that when I got higher in the organization, I had a depth of knowledge and capability that meant I was authentic, but I knew stuff. So I made a lot of decisions to walk out and go and do different jobs. And I've done it throughout my whole career.
Different jobs with different companies?
No, same company. So within Halifax, for example, I was on the counter for 3 years. Mm-hmm. There was a lady who came in after 6 months. Her lead generation was not as good as mine. Mm-hmm. Her performance with customers was not as good as mine. Balancing the tills, running the floats, all the stuff that you needed to do, I was a top performer. But my boss put her up for this accelerated development program where you went around and did a lot of branches. So I went to him after 3 years and said, look, I've been here doing a really good job, and I still haven't got onto this accelerated development program. And kind of I'm at a stage where year 1, I understand, year 2, get it.
Yeah.
But year 3, you're going to have to explain to me a little bit now about why I've not made it. And he put me on the accelerated development program, and I did that. So the accelerated development program at Halifax was a life changer for me. So what it did, it took people who weren't degree qualified, and it put them into a program for 12 months where they worked in branches and they worked in the call center. And if you passed the program, you were guaranteed your first management position anywhere.
Yeah.
But you had to be flexible. You had to be willing to move. You had to be able to move around. I did that, got my first opportunity and went to a branch. And I went to one of the Leeds and Halifax were merging, so I went to one of the old core Leeds branch, and first management position, once again, though, practicing leadership, thinking about leadership, thinking about things I needed to do. How could I, as a person of colour, lead a team and make them feel that, I was
Who
leadership.
predominantly don't look like you.
Don't look like me, right? Remember, at this time, Oki, right? At this time, I am the only black male as far south as Milton Keynes, Watford,
Yeah.
and as far north as Leeds.
In a leadership position.
And I think in the organisation,
Oh, in the whole organisation?
in the whole organisation, I think I'm the only black man,
Wow.
right? So in that situation, I'm like, I've got to be really strong to lead. So I went and I did that and I moved around. And the one thing that I think I did was I moved where the opportunities were. So I knew if I just stayed, I wasn't going to do it. But I had to go and do the jobs that nobody wanted to do. Yeah. I had to move to the places where some of my friends were saying to me, you're going to have to move all the way down there to get a job. I'll just hang around here and I'll get promoted. I was like, that's good for you, but that's not going to work for me, right? So I had to move around and go and do different jobs. So in Halifax, I moved, I learned. If there was something that I didn't know, I did a job around it. If I found that someone was blocking my way because for me, it was my race or my color, I kind of went, park yourself, that's okay. I'll move. So I moved from Birmingham to Chelmsford. Right?
Essex?
From Birmingham to Essex. And then I took a job in Cardiff. And from Cardiff, I was working in Edinburgh and Middlesbrough and Leeds. I went anywhere where there was an opportunity for me to progress.
Wow.
Because I took the opportunity, right?
So basically, yeah, my dad says opportunities pass, they don't pause, right? And so when you see one, you leap on one. There's something else that's really interesting that's sort of developing this whole ability to push back, right? To literally say, hang on, right? Because some people in the 3 years would have said it would become 5, 7, 10 years, and by that point it's too late, right? Do you think you'd have gotten that accelerated development program if you hadn't asked?
No.
Right.
I think I wouldn't have gotten that accelerated program if I hadn't asked. And the interesting in that accelerated program was, it's really funny, but at the end of that program, you had to do a presentation to the senior regional team, and you had to present on something. And I think at the time there was the Maxwell scandal was all around about him and the things that he'd done and his children, etc. And I did a presentation with lessons learned in childhood that were very different to the lessons that obviously I thought Maxwell had taught his children.
Yeah.
And there's this guy standing at the back of the room. He just walks in, glides in, stands at the back of the room, and he watches every person's presentation. And he walks out. And he was a regional chief people officer.
Right.
And he was like, I think you can go places. So you done really well. So he kind of marked me out and went, this is some boy that we need to look after and watch. Once again, authentic. Once again, linking my Caribbean roots to what I'd learned, right? Just being clear what stuff I need to do. And he gave me opportunity.
So what do you think the role of the network, mentorship and support has been in your career?
Huge. I think there were some people that were just able to see me. I mean, see my capability, see the things that I need to do. There are so many people. And you know, the interesting thing, the majority of my leaders in financial services are me women.
Yes. I think we discussed this before because it's the same for me.
Yeah, it's been women. And I've seen that, you know, as I was going through my own battles, I've seen that gender battle.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think, therefore, you know, some of my most effective and supportive stakeholders have been female leaders. But also there's been some people...
Generally white female leaders?
Yeah. Well, to be honest,
that's
what it was.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. But, you know, there's also some brilliant male mentors. So, you know, I'll call him out here, he'll hate it, but there's a guy called Ken Brown and Peter Collis. And they had come over as part of the merger from the Leeds to the Halifax. And I remember one day I was at my management position and I got a call saying the regional manager wants to see you in his office in an hour and a half in the center of Birmingham. Don't be late. Right, so I'm like, oh my God, what have I done last week? Have I not balanced the till, etc.? I walk into his office. He takes on the desk, there's a phone book and a mobile phone. He says, come in, Thompson. So I go and sit down. And he looks at me and says, do you know why you're here? I said, I hope I'm not going to get fired. And he said to me, well, you could get fired at the end of this job, but there's a telephone book. There's a mobile phone. I want you to go and be a business development manager in the center of Birmingham. Your target is 70 million. You're not going to hit it this year. But if you don't hit it next year, there's going to be a problem between you and I. And he just said to me, go and get a job. That job came with a car. It came with access. But it meant that Birmingham region was one of the weakest regions in the country. But it had a really diverse group of brokers. That's where I really got into the diversity mix. Asian, Black, Chinese. Yeah. It was all white. It was all within that stuff. And he gave me that opportunity. He didn't have to, right? But there was something I had done that made him think, I'll get that guy a chance. You know, so I think throughout my career, there's been people that have really helped me, and I've had brilliant leaders. But from every leader, regardless on what they may have thought of me, I tried to learn something from them. Yeah. The good, the bad, you know, the ones that really maybe never even rated me and kind of like, he's not going to get anywhere. I always try to take something from that interaction.
Yeah.
Not the bad stuff, but the stuff that I thought, you know, that was okay. Yeah. You did all right.
Yeah, we're all a product of sort of a jigsaw of leaders that we have seen. And the trick is to take the good and leave the bad, because none of us is perfect. Right? None of us. None of us is perfect. So it's a kind of real skill to be able to know that this way of being is really going to add to my thing.
But the thing for me too as well was, you know, in all that stuff, I was willing to do the work.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was willing to put the effort in.
Doing the work. It's a phrase that I love. You know, are you ready to do the work?
Are you ready to do the work?
Are you ready to do the work? I ask people all the time.
Yeah.
Are you ready to do the work? They're like, well, what do you mean?
What's it mean? Are you ready? Are you really ready?
Are you really ready to do the work? If so, let's go.
Let's go.
Right? You know. So we, not famously, because not many people know, we met in 2020 around George Floyd.
Yeah.
And both of us on a session talking about what needs to happen and the struggle. And I want to make it the struggle like it's Martin Luther King struggle, but the fact that there is racism around and in the workplace. Most people would accept that. I think I accept it, you accept it, most people do. A lot of it institutional, not necessarily individual. So that was 2020, right? We fast forward to 2024. Around that time, there was a real feeling of hope that things would change. I wasn't so sure. When you think about progress in the last 4 years and where we are today, how do you think about it?
You know, when that George Floyd thing when George Floyd happened, I think it was the shock of it at a time where people kind of went, really, that stuff doesn't happen. In our minds, we know there are challenges that people, different races have, but we would never think that something like that would happen. But you know, Oki, when I was 14 years old, I used to, so imagine in Barbados, there's only so much you can do in an island surrounded by 106 square miles.
Yeah.
But my brother and I would lie in our bedrooms. We had 2 separate bedrooms right next to the ocean, windows up, the curtains just blowing in the air, and we would listen to American Top 40 every weekend. So I grew up on those songs and those stuff. And I was 14 years old, and I remember this song being played, The Way It Is.
Bruce Hornsby in the Range.
Bruce Hornsby in the Range. And at first when I listened to the song, because, you know, back in the day, you had your cassette player, and when you found a song you like, you kind of went, press, you record, right? And then you're into it. And this piano started out this song, and I was like, whoa, this is a bit different.
Yeah.
Press record. And my brother was like, yeah, Damian, record that one. And I sat there and listened to the song. The piano was amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, his ability was just brilliant. But then I listened to the words. That's just the way it is. Some things will never change. Yeah. But don't you believe it? And that was my George Floyd moment, right? Because at that point, what I'd realized was in that song, what the old man is saying to the person he's speaking to is, I didn't make the rules, but that's just the way it is. Yeah. Some things are never going to change. So I thought, it's a moment, but it's not a transformation.
No.
And the main thing for people was to realize that together things needed to change. But I was like you, I wasn't sure that was going to be dramatic. We're going to get 8% or whatever the population is where it is. Because our system isn't really made like that.
Yep.
Our system listens, it consults, it reviews, and then it changes. And I think now what's happening is it's created an opportunity for people to really get opportunity, but they've got to do the work. The work's not going to change. What you need to do.
And it shouldn't change.
And it shouldn't change. This is a competitive world we live in. You have to be good. You have to hone your skills. You have to drive the things you need to do. Nothing is given. But just listen to the song from Bruce Hornsby in the Range, and you kind of get to the song of, this is going to take generations.
Yeah.
You know, and George Floyd doesn't make me think that that's going to happen in my generation.
No.
But it makes me more hopeful to think in future generations, if we build from where we are, it will get better. It will get stronger. Maybe for my kids, they'll see more than I've seen, but maybe they won't.
But what needs to happen then? So I think you're right, but you know, that's just the way it is. But don't you believe it? Is what it then goes on to say, right? But then change doesn't generally happen on its own, right?
No.
And so you'll always find the Damians of this world and the people who've been on this podcast and maybe even me, but we don't want them to be exceptions to the rule. We want them to be more and more of them, right? So you'll find these amazing, resilient people that can battle through, bash their head against a glass ceiling and break it, right? But they shouldn't have to do that all the time. Everyone shouldn't have to do that. So what do you think the system needs to do to change to allow more roses to grow from concrete?
I think the system's in a really good place of, I'm really loving the move on social mobility, right? Because for me, that is the thing, that's a truck we need to move. Because it's about that. It's about people with that belief and that growth, kind of thinking to themselves, "There's a chance for me here, regardless of what I am. There's a mechanism being created here upon which I can move." So for me, getting large organizations to focus on social mobility, but within social mobility, make sure it's representative. So you're taking everybody on that journey. Then I think more opportunities will come. I think second thing that we need to do is to start thinking about where the future opportunities of work are. What are the future breakthroughs, right? So, when I look at my two boys now, I kind of look forward as a parent and go, what is their working atmosphere going to be? Is it going to be an accountant or is it going to be more creative? Is it going to be around AI and those capabilities? And therefore, what can I do to help them to shape some of that? But basically behind it, I recognize that I cannot create the environment, the pressure that made me stronger. I can never replicate for my children.
No.
I can't take them back to the Barbados that was in 1976.
Well, in fact, it's the reverse.
It's reverse for them.
Because they could have had a nice, cozy, great life. You've got a great job. You live in a great house and a great area. The pressure cooker you had is not the same for them. In fact, it's almost the diametric opposite.
But it's the concept of my dad, which is not you're gonna have to work harder, but how do you think? What are the atmospheres and things that you need to think about? What is success? What does success really mean, right? So I talk to my kids now about how do you find opportunity? What do you want to challenge yourself to do? Where do you see growth? Come and be with me. See me around the house doing things. I cut the grass. I don't have to, but why do I do it? How do I work with your pocket money? How do I think? So I think for a lot of parents, we have to create the atmospheres for our children to be able to get there. And then in organizations, we have to find ways to make sure that things change. So not having to have a degree to get a job. Apprenticeships, things that get people in and then allow them to be able to grow. And then the best of those ones have to strive. There's no easy answer, okay? And we all talk about it, but there's no easy answer. And I'm trying to get to this stage now where I say to people, I want to share with you my experience and the things that I learned. So, for example, read a quality newspaper once a week. So if you get opened up into a conversation, you have a clue about other things outside of your area. Travel outside of your community. Try to live outside of your community. Try to get leadership experience. Join the scouts. What are you doing to shape yourself for the opportunity? It's got to be wider than some of the conversations we're having today. And it isn't just about organizations. It's about families. It's about communities coming together and really challenging. Because for me, we've got to create that opportunity and that challenge and that ability to have wider conversations with our kids.
Yeah.
And I think if I think about what's forged me, organizations haven't forged me. I have found a way to be successful in organizations by being confident in me.
Yeah.
And therefore, there'll be lots of stuff that we try to do with companies, etc., to grow, to make sure there's opportunities. But ultimately, we need people to recognize what are the jobs of the future going to be? What are the areas and skill sets that we need to grow our capability in? What are the things that we really as parents want to die for our children? And how are we starting to have those conversations? My boys are 9 and 10, but I'm trying to think of the smart conversations I have with them. Yeah. I'm trying to see if they can do tricks like tricking me, right? So and I'm trying to get some of that thought process. So this weekend, which is a classic example, where usually my dad would have been really angry with me, but I've thought to myself, no, that's a smart angle. I bought my kids a watch because they were going overseas and I wanted to be able to. The mum.
You wanted to track them.
The mum wanted to track them so they could
Not
call.
you.
Not me.
You. Not
my
you.
mum wanted to track them, right? So to get the watch, you have to have a phone. So I bought him the phone. But I don't allow him to use the phone because I've got the code to the phone. And for the last 5 weeks, every weekend he comes to me and he says, Daddy, can I have the code? Because I want to text a friend. I said, okay, put the code in. I know 20 seconds later, once he's put it down, he can't operate. He's got to come back.
Yeah.
He's got to come back. He's got to come back. So this weekend, he came to me and he said, Dad, can you put the code in? And I went, yep. And then he waited for the exact amount of time that I would think the code was required again. But what he had done was he'd gone onto the phone and found Face ID. So when he brought it back to me, it was to put the code in for Face ID, not to open the phone. So then he gets through and he's got it. And the only reason I knew, not at the time I thought, this doesn't look like the screen, but I'm busy.
Yeah.
His brother told on him. But I said to him today, I said, that's problem solving.
Yeah.
It's not the right problem that you solve.
No, it's the right problem for him.
It was the right problem. It's the right problem for you. But I love your ingenuity. Now, let's talk about how that relates to mass. How that relates to you doing your homework when I tell that I don't want to do it. You don't want to do it. And why you don't put in enough effort. And why I'm going to reward you for trying to trick me.
Yeah. Well, trying.
He did.
Actually tricking you.
10 years old and I'm done.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think in this whole wise debate about where we are, yes, I want to see more representation. Yes, I look forward and I go to myself, when will be the day we have a black CEO of a financial institution in the UK, or one of the major ones? When's that day going to come? But my part in that is just to do my best. So that when people look in organizations and they go, oh, that Damian Thompson is a good leader. We can have a conversation with him that's broad and he can have that stuff. And he does lead well. And I might not be the person that gets there, but I think I want to open up my organization to go, well, if he can do it, that's the stuff I can do. And I remember at an organization I was at where one of the NEDs said, when I was in the room, which I thought was really powerful, she said, no, as a management team, don't ever tell me that you can't find people of color to come in and do the job because Damian's here. I don't actually remember saying it, but that to me was like, whoa, that's the change, right? So for me, it's about how people get into organizations and what do they do and how do they stretch themselves to prove behind the generations that this they need to do. So when I talked to my dad a couple of years ago and I said to him, Dad, I now get on a train and I go to Threadneedle Street. I get off the train, I'm going to work, Dad. And my dad said to me, Damian, you know something? When I was in England, no black man made that journey to work in that area of the city.
Yeah.
Just think of that.
Well, I do. I think, but my reticence is that still not enough do make that journey, right? And that's the change that we.
That's the change we need.
But I think what you've shown here today has been amazingly powerful. It's one, it's possible. We know it's possible. Two, don't look for the barriers, jump over them. Don't ever give up. Be resilient. Knock your head against. I had a question about what advice would you give to people? You've given us that advice, which is be persistent and be prepared to do the work. Right. Yeah. Be prepared to do the work.
And I always say to people, the thing that I always say to people is read. I went through a period, maybe in my 20s, where I said to my wife, right, every weekend, I'm going to read the Times on a Sunday from cover to cover. I'm reading about fashion, style, all this. She'd be like, why do you want to know this stuff? I'd be saying, because if somebody wants to have a conversation about a topic, I want to be in that conversation. I want to be able to say something that makes sense because I've widened myself, right? So in life, okay, I haven't just tried to I haven't just tried to break those barriers at work. I've tried to break those barriers in life. So, to be the first person of color to live on the street, to break into areas in the country where we don't live. So people can kind of go, there's a really nice black guy that lives at the top of that road. People come to my house and people are just amazing, like, is the owner of the house in? And I go, yeah, he is. Yeah, wonderful. Is there anything you need? It's a lovely house. Can you tell him it's a beautiful house? Do you work here? Do you do the garden? I say, yeah, I do. And then they come out 2 weeks later and say, he's driving. Oh shit.
Yes.
Ooh.
Oh yeah. No. I have that. I have that a lot. Look, I think we could have a part 2, right? We can have a part 2 of this conversation. I mean, it's been incredible, Damian. Everything that I would have expected, knowing you all these years, we've had and we've discussed. And then you and I know there's more to discuss. The work is never over, will never be over, right? But I hope anyone listening to this is going to have a real insight into what it takes to get there. And I hope that the young people, all young people, not just people of colour, can listen to your stories and learn that, persistence pays off. Be curious, ask questions, try to learn, move forward, but be resilient. So I just want to say thank you for coming on to the podcast. There's definitely a part 2 in there somewhere. So I'm sure you'll be back to talk and tell us more stories. I know you have loads more. So thank you very much. It's literally been amazing.
Thank you, Oki. Look forward to coming again.
Part 2.
Part 2.
All right.